Leslie Katz and Wilsell Brown, Leslie, are being kept out of the history books. When I was lured to Mount Desert Island, it was obviously and on its face evidence that AIDS was an organized attack. A number of people had heard, including Robert Forever King Crimson, whose Gurdjieff Society Zell was a part of, had orchestrated or heard of the story of Jimmy and Leslie Katz, and they construed it as a response to keep him away from her. Leslie and I went to Fanny and Alexander, or Nicholas and Alexander. And when the Divine Family were executed, she was spitting nails all night about what had happened. She really detested Bob Dylan too. She squirmed. By then, her behavior towards me had been routinized. There was what she called her nightly cat cleaning, and then her rejection of me as a, fit to um, envelope in the lore of of embrace. We didn't make love, in other words. And everybody heard about this story, this Nicholas and Alexander Paramount picture that had developed between me and the valedictorian of the Ellis Girls School, who just happened to be a red-headed, tang-haired is Australian Jewish Israeli. He just happened to have the Princeton brilliant of all that I sit her side all the time. Delton Doyley, Steve Langer. And I set up this line in the sand, as Bush called it, and I just happened to be from his ship in the Navy. Well, the reason I'm getting into this high drama is that when you look squarely at what got me investigating, you see my name surrounded with positive and negative signs in the reference to injecting people. In Will Zell's postcard, he was talking about a scheme to transform the human race by injecting the blood back in art school before AIDS happened. So all of the maneuvering and cowardliness and co-orchestrations of Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Peter Gabriel are affirming the AIDS attack, but selling it to the queer show as somehow the stand of John Lennon, because Yoko Ono was working with Gail Burston and Will Zell and empowering them and setting me up and doing espionage, and Seattle was giving her backup. I mean, they've tortured me into a state of absolute ruin. Adam Eisenstadt, one of the Israeli Defense Forces in Pittsburgh, would get on the radio disguising his voice as Abdul the terrorist, pretending to be a Palestinian, saying no one is innocent. And I called them out at Carnegie Mellon as avenging Auschwitz in the 90s in print, in the newspaper in Carnegie Mellon. Everybody saw that too. So for George Galloway and weaponized news, who are sort of homophobic or something, don't seem to have any problem getting girls themselves. This is all la-di-da for the gay community and about Lenin. So they don't care about the actual facts of what happened. They say that the letters proved I could have saved John Lennon. Nowhere does it say John Lennon's name, nor would explain how a 12-year-old in the boonies of Pittsburgh would have access to the prior knowledge of the exact day that he would be available for assassination. 6 years in advance without social planning by his inside circle. They don't bother to even engage the reality of what happened because they're too busy in mastering the deception of the operation. So these people, what it is that the Israelis are smarter than everybody else. Plain and simple. Adam Eisenstadt said, to the winners go the spoils. One of the spoils of victory in a contest is safety and peer support. Well, you could see what they did to me. The people I was trying to protect poisoned me and robbed me. And the Israelis made off singing, yeah, yeah, yeah. And to this day, they're singing, yeah, yeah, yeah. Paul McCartney, Bobby Kennedy this morning reportedly, I can't read his lips. There was no captioning, but supposedly he said there's a genocide of Israelis going on, not a genocide of Palestinians. I mean, he should get on the radio and say, disguise his voice as Abdul the terrorist. But so should weaponized news and George Galloway. That's my point. They're covering for the people. They're all covering for Will Zell. They're all covering for Leslie Katz. They don't dare admit that the lurid yellow journalism of George Galloway towards people who have extramarital affairs is like Ben Guevara panting at the flotilla hostages and making a mockery of them because he doesn't remember what it was like to be a kid. He doesn't see being beaten and tortured and used for sex as any grounds for any indignation. Instead, he sees it as something that he can leer at and set up as could have saved John Lennon. So you are in fact not the walrus, queer ball. It's the stupidest trick that millions of people have ever fallen for. To support the people who they say killed John Lennon in the AIDS attack because Leslie Katz was still a virgin when romanced by the puppet of Oliver Stone. I mean, these people are all braying about how they puppet master Jimmy Carrey. You should see them behind the scenes and even talking in sideways in weaponized news. How they mastered the topic of MK Ultra, Operation Monarch, and manipulated the deaf kid who wasn't man enough. You know, it's a sign of their complicity. Now, I'll try to keep it simple because they keep it simple. Jimmy, we support the AIDS operation because Jimmy had to be kept away from Leslie and he could have saved John Lennon. That's their simplicity. Okay. And doesn't, then you're not allowed to penetrate that simplicity. They are using John Lennon as a diversion to cover for their complicity in the AIDS operation. Is what is reality. And they are admitting, they can't deny that they ignored public warning that Israel was engaged in revenge for Auschwitz. That's what it says. They can't deny that they are ignoring, that they ignored in the 90s when they could have arrested Gail Burstyn on charges of having scripted the murder of John Lennon, if that's what they believe really happened. Now, they are so stupid, in other words, that they created and adopted this brilliant contraption about lines in the sands as pussyball warriors. And the whole thing turns on the black man gets the chocolate cake in the end, the Japanese version. That's what the whole thing turns on. And they want to pretend that that wasn't planned, that that wasn't adoption of the operation, that that wasn't sanctification, that the Barack Obama presidency wasn't the Johnny Cochran for Hitler Reagan.